What's happening? Happy hump day to you and yours. Thanks for joining me as always. Everything Pats, a New England Patriots podcast. Let's talk Eliot Wolf. I saw some reactions during the draft last weekend that were screaming via Twitter with the exclamation points, apologize to Eliot Wolf, apologize to Eliot Wolf. I saw people say Eliot Wolf killed this draft. He absolutely slayed the draft. I should apologize to Eliot Wolf. We all need to apologize to Eliot Wolf. Respect Eliot Wolf. I saw all of these reactions to the Patriots draft as the draft was going on. A couple of things before I get to Wolf, who many of you would say I was a little bit nicer to than a lot of other people in the media. I just looked at Eliot Wolf and I tried to say thumbs up, thumbs down to each and every move that he made. And I thought it was much closer to 50-50 than it was 80-20, bad to good. And I think a lot of people, they just look at the Jalen Polk pick and they got all worked up. And I understand. I totally understand. I thought I was fair to Wolf. I gave him a failing grade last year. Said that he failed in the 2024 offseason. Could have, should have done more. But I also understand what he was dealing with in the moment. And I still look at it and say to myself, well, it wasn't the easiest job to have. Again, no excuses, no excuses. He failed last offseason. But I think a lot of people got very angry at Eliot Wolf without truly appreciating in the moment. I think they appreciate it now more than ever because they look back at what happened with Mayo and kind of the mess that unfolded with Robert Kraft and the process with Belichick and et cetera, et cetera. I think more people appreciate the challenge it was put towards Eliot Wolf last year to try to put together a roster, given what the roster was when he first stepped into that role. But that's all in the past. And we look at right now, the present, and we look at what could possibly develop and unfold into the future. But a couple of things before I get to whether or not Eliot Wolf truly vindicated himself during this 2025 draft. Number one, it's way too early. It's way too early to say that this was a home run draft class when we talk about on the field what these guys are going to be in the NFL. We have no idea how these players are going to perform. We feel like we think they could perform a certain way, but we have no idea. There's no guarantee. I really liked Jalen Polk last year. I thought Polk was a good pick, and he had a completely useless rookie season. So none of us truly know what these guys are going to do on the field, how they're going to perform. When we talk about draft grades, when we look at the last draft that we just witnessed over the weekend, we talk about the execution of the draft. We talk about where guys were ranked, what the consensus big board said, where the Patriots drafted them compared to the consensus big board. We talk about the Patriots and how they handled runs at positions. Were they ahead of the curve? Were they behind the curve? Did they take somebody too early, way ahead of that curve? Did they manipulate the board in the right way with certain trades that they made? That's what we're talking about when we give grades. How we feel about those players stemming from their college career, where we rank those players, where you got those players, how you manipulated the board, the execution. Secondly, I'll say this. I want to make it clear. Mike Vrabel is the shot caller in this organization. We all know that. I've said it a bunch of times. Mike Vrabel has final say. Vrabel sets the player profiles. He had a meeting with the scouting staff and the front office before the combine. I talked about that on, I believe, today's Locked On Patriots podcast that you can check out. He set the player profiles. He told the front office what he envisioned his team was going to look like and what he wanted at each and every single position. This is Mike Vrabel's team. This is Mike Vrabel's vision as a football team, and he has final say. So ultimately, it's Mike Vrabel's draft because whoever has the final say, they get the credit, they get the criticism to the draft class. So I want to get those two things out of the way. It's way too early to guarantee that this draft is going to be a home run on the field. It's way too early. I also want to make it clear this is Mike Vrabel's team. He has final say, and he gets the credit. He gets the criticism when all is said and done. When we look back at this class 2-3 years from now, we're going to say Mike Vrabel did a great job. However, Eliot Wolf deserves credit. Eliot Wolf deserves credit for what we saw in this draft, what we witnessed. Eliot Wolf 100% deserves some credit. The grading system, let's start there. What grading system did they use for this draft? They used Wolf's grading system. They didn't use that grading system last year's draft. They were trying to implement the new system over the past year. Now, of course, Wolf told the scouts when he took over the job that he was going to change the grading system. I thought, and this was my fault, and I think other people thought, that the Patriots not only were going to change the grading system last year, but they were going to use that grading system in the 24 draft. But that's not what happened. They didn't have enough time to go through everything. They couldn't rewrite the books, so to speak. So this year's draft class is the first draft class here in New England using the Eliot Wolf grading system. The grading system that Wolf learned while he was in Green Bay, the grading system that Alonzo Highsmith is very familiar with. So when we talk about this draft and we talk about the grades that were given within that front office to each player, that's Eliot Wolf's grading system. Mike Vrabel did not walk into that facility in January and say, we're going to change all of these grades for each and every single solitary prospect. You don't have enough time to do that. So Vrabel walked into the facility and he based the grades of the players he was looking at. Those were based on Eliot Wolf's system. It was fully implemented and it was used this year. So this is the very first draft with the Patriots that Wolf has been here that they've used his grading system. And what we talk about when we discuss Wolf's grading system is it's more of you're going to go with best player available instead of just going with need. You're not going to shoehorn players in certain spots because you feel like, oh, that guy fits the team. Years ago, Bill Belichick would draft somebody like Joanne Johnson and say, all right, well, Joanne Johnson. It's Joanne Williams, wasn't it? Joanne Williams. I don't know who Joanne Johnson was. He would draft somebody like Joanne Williams and say, all right, we're going to draft Joanne Williams because we believe that he can cover safeties and he can fit this role. And that's the particular role that we need for this football team. Eliot Wolf comes from a different school. They use a different grading system. And they have a different philosophy approaching the draft. And what we saw this year was Eliot Wolf's grading system to go along with Mike Vrabel and his thought process with Ryan Cowden and Stretch about how they felt regarding certain players. So Wolf, first and foremost, deserves credit for the grading system that was implemented. What was used in this draft, that goes to Eliot Wolf. So props to him. That's credit. Now, of course, when you're talking about the grading system that Eliot Wolf provided and that they used, then that means that they're targeting players. The grading system targets players for consideration. So let me try to describe this as quickly as I can and explain it to all of you. So Mike Vrabel walks in. He walks in January. A lot of the work had already been done by the scouting staff, the front office. A lot of the hay was in the barn, right? So Vrabel walks in and he lays out, these are the types of players that I'm looking for. This is what I like at defensive end. This is what I like at safety. This is what we're looking at for this particular position and how we're going to work all of it into the final product. So Vrabel lets the scouting staff and Eliot Wolf, he lets all those guys know, this is what I'm looking for in a player. And then it's up to Wolf and the scouts, the front office, to get together, comb through the information, and give Vrabel what he's looking for. And then Vrabel takes that information and he pairs it down and says, okay, I like this guy. I like this guy more than I like that guy. So when we talk about the grading system being Wolf's, we also have to understand that the information that had been compiled and when the players were paired down and Vrabel said, this is the type of player that I want, the players that Vrabel received to look at, that's all the work that Eliot Wolf put in, along with his scouting staff, guys like Cam Williams and Highsmith and even Matt Groh to a point. That's how this worked. So, of course, Eliot Wolf deserves some credit because the grading system was his. The grading system helped figure out which players that Vrabel would target, given the player profiles that he told the staff that he was looking for. And then what do you do after that? Well, when you have the grading system and you start to pare those players down, you start to stack your board. So the Patriots board, the way it was stacked, was pretty much Eliot Wolf and the scouting staff's work, along, of course, with Vrabel over the past couple of months. But when they stack the board vertically and horizontally, they're stacking the board based on the grades. And again, the grading system comes from Eliot Wolf. So the way the board was stacked had a lot to do with Eliot Wolf's influence on how to grade these players, how to evaluate these players. All right, I got a couple of more thoughts on Wolf. But before I get to those thoughts, doesn't cost you any money, doesn't cost you a lot of time, but you can help us out an awful lot. Click that thumbs up as you watch us on the live stream on YouTube. Don't forget to like this podcast. The more thumbs ups that we get, the more eyeballs we get as well because of the algorithm. So don't forget to help us out. Click that thumbs up button. Like this podcast, like this live stream. Don't forget to comment as well. I see a lot of people, Daniel jumping in saying no, all Vrabel night and day from last year. I don't know if Daniel has listened to the entire podcast yet, or he's just answering the question that is in the title. But I appreciate you, Daniel, for stopping by and throwing a comment in. Don't forget to like, don't forget to comment. Both those things help us tremendously with the algorithm. They don't cost you any money. And don't forget to subscribe. The goal is 7,000 subscribers by mandatory minicamp. That's June 9th. We have a ways to go. We've got hundreds of subscribers to gain here. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Two more things. Actually, three more things I want to talk about regarding Wolf with this draft. I'll reiterate. Mike Vrabel gets the final call. Mike Vrabel will get the credit. He will get the criticism 2-3 years down the road when we look back at this draft. But Eliot Wolf absolutely deserves credit. He deserves credit for this draft. Some of the credit. There's no doubt. Not only when you're evaluating these players, and we went through the grading system, the other part that Eliot Wolf has a major hand in is processing the information and the intelligence from other teams. Eliot Wolf, he's making these phone calls. He's calling other GMs. He's calling other presidents of football operations. He's calling other front office staff. He's calling people that he has a network with. And so are Ryan Cowden and Mike Vrabel. But Eliot Wolf is acting as the point person. He's the guy that's, trying to peg the value of certain players. He's talking to other teams. He's gathering this information. He's gathering this intel so the Patriots have a better idea as to the value of each player. So when Braden Swinson falls to the 5th round, the Patriots being able to wait and getting an edge like Swinson, that has a lot to do with the legwork that Eliot Wolf and his staff have done over the past several months. They're trying to peg the value. They know that Swinson might go later than a lot of us believed he was going to go. Again, mock drafts aren't real life. So gathering that information, gathering that intelligence, it not only helps you peg the value of a player, but it also helps you understand when a run is going to happen at a certain position. The Joshua Farmer example is the perfect one. When you decided to jump in, you traded up to 137 to draft Farmer, and then I think it was 3 out of the next 5 or 6 picks were defensive tackles. That again goes back to the work that Wolf and Cowden and that front office did building up to the draft, understanding when guys are going to go, understanding when positional runs might happen. Drafting Travion Henderson at 38, when in real time, a lot of us thought, well, that means they're not going to be able to draft a Jalen Knoll or a Kyle Williams. Those guys are going to be gone by pick 69, but they weren't. They were both on the board at pick 69. That work, the information, the intel gathered, the grading system, All of that. Eliot Wolf has a major influence in all of that. He also has influence with the trade calls. Did you notice who was on the phone? Who was on the phone with teams? It was Wolf. It wasn't Mike Vrabel. It was Wolf. Wolf was the point man. If you go back and you watch right before the Patriots picked Travion Henderson at 38, and Andrew Callahan asked Wolf about that moment, and Wolf said that there was a debate going on and that they were taking phone calls. If you go back right before Henderson was picked at 38, who's on the phone? It's Eliot Wolf. So Wolf is also dealing with teams during the draft, moving up, moving down, all those different things. He has a major hand in that. So he's not the shot caller. It's ultimately Mike Vrabel's call. Vrabel has the hammer, so to speak. But I do think while this draft did not necessarily vindicate Wolf because he doesn't have the final say, I do think that you look at how this draft was executed, and as far as on paper, the talent that they brought in, Wolf absolutely deserves a good amount of credit for how this draft went last weekend. Ryan Cowden has never been the guy in a front office. Mike Vrabel has never been the guy in a front office. Wolf has. Even if it didn't go well last year, he's had that experience. So his experience and him leading this front office from April of 2024 through at least late January, early February, when Vrabel had that conversation before the combine with the staff, all the work that had been done over the past 10 months before Vrabel stepped in, all of that was done by Eliot Wolf and his staff. So I believe he absolutely, remember, Will Campbell said that in the fall, Eliot Wolf went to an LSU practice or whatever it was, like week 5. And Campbell had a conversation with Wolf back then. So what we saw play out over the weekend, that wasn't built up to in 6 weeks, 7 weeks. What we saw unfold over the weekend was a year-long process. Right as that draft ended last year, you begin the work on the next draft. So from April all the way until the middle of January, Wolf and his staff is doing that work. So he absolutely deserves some credit. Vindication from last year, I won't go that far, but I do think he deserves credit. He ran the scouting department. He ran the process. And he was the point man during the draft. So I think he absolutely deserves some credit. And I would have to imagine that Wolf, and this is part of the reason why I think he looked a little bit different at the podium last weekend, because I've got to imagine that Wolf feels pretty good about what they did. And to him, he walks away saying, I was able to focus on my job this time around, and I feel like I did a much better job, and I feel like we did a much better job. All right, I want to get to the battle that we're about to witness during camp. One of the most interesting battles to play out at camp coming up. I want to get to that in a minute, but first, Ryan James jumps in with a $5 super chat. Thank you, Ryan. Definitely excited about our drafted players. What is your take on the UDFAs, Nick, for the Pats? I want to get to the UDFAs, Ryan, hopefully within the next couple of days. There's been just, so many stories to read through. And, first and foremost, I focus on the guys that were drafted in the 7 rounds, and we have all this other stuff that comes out, all this other content. I do think I'll just give you a general view of the UDFA class. I do think there are a couple of guys that are, interesting to me. I think there are a couple of guys who could make this team. I honestly do. I don't think this is a situation where you look at the UDFAs and they're all going to be gone, right? Like that's just not, I don't think that's what we're dealing with here. But I think there are some guys in this class that you look at and you feel pretty good about. CJ Dipper, the tight end, he's somebody I know. Evan Lazar and some others have been excited about that guy and being able to get him. Many people believed he would be drafted in this draft. a good blocking tight end. Seems like he's got some potential as a receiver as well. So he's obviously an interesting name. A lot of people are talking about Efton Chisholm being the next Julian Edelman or an Edelman-like player for Josh McDaniels. So I think Efton Chisholm is a very interesting player. So there's a lot of thoughts there. But I hopefully will get to, I also don't want to forget Lan Larson, because a lot of people are talking about Lan Larson, about, his ability. UC Davis out there in California. I drove by UC Davis a number of times when I lived in Sacramento. He's a very interesting prospect via UDFA. So hopefully we dive in a little bit deeper into those players. But it's just been, we've had so much focus on the guys who were drafted in the first, 4 rounds. And then, I haven't even gotten to a full deep dive into Farmer. I haven't gotten into a full deep dive into Jared Wilson. So hopefully we get there. We got time to get there. But my general sense is I think you could see a few of these UDFAs make this team this year. And it's all about competition, which leads me to, and again, thanks for the 5, Ryan, which leads me to this all-out battle at left guard. Who's going to play left guard for this football team? I think it's a legitimate question to ask, and I think there are a lot of options. Right now, when you're looking at this offensive line, it feels like Will Campbell at left tackle, Garrett Bradbury at center, Owenu at right guard, Morgan Moses at right tackle. But there's still a question. There's still a question as to who's going to be that guy in between Bradbury and Campbell. And I look at this, I'm a professional wrestling fan, as many of you know. This is kind of like the Royal Rumble at left guard. Now, I say Royal Rumble because more casual fans and more non-wrestling fans are aware of the Royal Rumble. I might even use the Elimination Chamber. That might be a better analogy to the wrestling world. But we're going to see a bunch of people. We're going to see a bunch of guys fighting, scrapping to start at left guard. This is going to be a big-time competition. You got City So, you got Cole Strange, you got Layden Robinson. Don't forget about Wes Schweitzer, who signed a 1-year deal, veteran guy. And when I look at those names, when I look at So, Strange, Robinson, Schweitzer, when you look at those names, maybe even somebody else who I'll bring up in a minute, I feel pretty good about it. I don't feel great about it, but I feel pretty good about where they are at left guard, because I honestly believe, like, if you look at the amount of options that you have, they have 4, 5, 6 guys that they can have compete for this spot. And the best man wins, right? The guy who plays the best will win that spot. If you go back to last year, they were thin, man. They were thin. Jake Andrews was hurt. Now he's gone. You looked at Layden Robinson, didn't know what you had in Robinson. He was just drafted. Antonio Mafi never worked out. They tried him at center. He was quickly gone. Cole Strange was coming back from an injury. He wouldn't play until late in the year. I mean, when you look at this shit, like they signed Nick Leverett and they had to move Leverett to center because of the injury situation to Andrews, both of them. So comparing last year to this year, they're in a much better spot just because of the numbers. They've got 5 or 6 guys that you could argue will be a left guard this year to start for them. Last season, you were really scraping at the bottom of the barrel due to injury and other circumstances. So they're in a much better spot this year than they were last year trying to figure out left guard. Now, one question that I have is, do the Patriots look at Jared Wilson and say to themselves that he also could play a role in this competition? They do. Eliot Wolf said, I believe it was on Friday night after they drafted Wilson, Eliot Wolf said that Wilson has center guard flexibility. And he added that he could see Wilson playing guard with Garrett Bradbury at center. So Eliot Wolf told us last Friday night, right after drafting Jared Wilson, that Wilson could actually be the left guard for this football team. He could be the guy. So you also throw Wilson into that mix. So, Strange, Robinson, Schweitzer, Wilson, That's 5 guys. You've got 5 possibilities. Much better than having 1 or 2 dudes that you're depending on, relying on, and hoping that they could be okay. Now, Jared Wilson, it's interesting. Wolf, that's a projection that we're talking about because Dane Brugler in The Beast listed Jared Wilson. One of his weaknesses was that Wilson doesn't have proven positional versatility because Wilson has played 93 career snaps at the guard position. So when Eliot Wolf says he feels like Jared Wilson has guard center flexibility, that's a projection. I'm sure he watched the 93 snaps of Wilson at guard, but that is mostly projection. And don't forget, Wilson was a 1-year starter at Georgia, and he was starting at center. So maybe that projection bears fruit. Maybe Wilson could play guard. Maybe he ends up winning this competition. But even if you don't want to put him into the mix, you still have 4 guys with Strange, Robinson, and Schweitzer battling it out. And I think left guard it's important because if Will Campbell gets off to a slow start, some of you are concerned about Will Campbell. Is he a tackle? Is he not a tackle? We've talked about it so much leading into the draft. If Will Campbell gets off to a slower start at left tackle, well, obviously left guard is critical because it would allow Josh McDaniels to help Campbell on the outside if Campbell needs that help. If you've got a left guard that needs help, and then you've got and Campbell gets off to a slow start, now McDaniels has to figure out, how do I help my left side of the offensive line? It's not just tackle, it's also guard. It's not just guard, it's also tackle. Now I got to help both guys. It's much easier to help one guy. So if you get somebody who you trust, you get somebody who you believe in, if we feel like whoever starts at left guard is going to be able to give them average to above average play, then that helps McDaniels plan to help Campbell. Because he can say, let's say if it's City So, all right, I trust City So. So's playing well. Now I can put a little bit of extra help towards Campbell. And I don't feel like I'm sacrificing too much because I trust that So can get the job done. If you've got 2 questions on the left side, now you're going back and forth. You're toggling between how do you help one guy and how do you help the other. Let's not forget that Garrett Bradbury had a down year last season with Minnesota, especially in pass protection. It's pretty bad in pass protection, especially late in the season. So you're going to need some help. Left guard will help that interior offensive line, will help Bradbury, but will also help Will Campbell so McDaniels can help Campbell if need be. And the interior offensive line is much more important now than it's ever been. You go back 5 years, 8 years, 10 years ago, I don't think we're paying as much attention to the center and guard positions, mostly the guard position, center, of course, with the communication with the quarterback and all of that. But we weren't paying as much attention to the guard position across the NFL as we are now because NFL teams, they have that interior pass rush. And as we know, the thing that really, bothers a quarterback, hinders a quarterback, is that rush up the middle. We saw it with Brady for years. As great as Brady was, that rush straight up the middle, forcing him out of the pocket, flushing him out of the pocket, that was one of the biggest issues for him. So now offensive linemen on the interior, they're crucial. Defenses are rushing a lot more up the middle. There's a lot more interior defensive line talent in the game now. You saw how much Milton Williams got paid by the Pats, and you look at how much guards are getting paid now. If we go back, and this was on me, last year I was talking about if you pay Onwenu $20 million a year, that you're paying a tackle, you're paying him tackle money. I was wrong on that. I was behind the 8 ball. I was behind the curve of the game. I didn't appreciate that offensive guards are getting paid a lot more money now than they might have been paid 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And if you look at the top guards financially, these guys are making $20 million, $22 million a year. So the game has changed. So having that interior offensive line pass protection is crucial. So left guard, this competition at left guard to me is going to be one of the most important competitions in all of camp. Because if you need to help Campbell, if you need to help Bradbury, and just the general idea from 30,000 feet, you need to protect the middle. So will it be So? Will it be Strange? Will it be Robinson? Will it be Schweitzer? Will Jared Wilson be like the horse coming on from the outside? Will he take over left guard? We'll have to wait and see, but they have the numbers. And I do believe if Will Campbell holds his water at left tackle, if Campbell is capable of holding the water, you'll survive left guard. Even if you get slightly below average play at left guard, your offensive line will survive if Campbell can hold his water. I trust Onwenu, solely focused at right guard. I trust Onwenu. I trust Morgan Moses. I think Bradbury will be fine. If Campbell can hold his water and you've got to help at left guard a little bit, and left guard might be a little shaky, you can survive that, because I said this last year and I still believe it. If you've got 4 out of 5 offensive linemen playing well, that's manageable. You can always help somebody out. It is manageable. You can have one weakness on the offensive line. Of course, you don't want it, but you can survive a single weakness on the offensive line. So I think between those names we've thrown out, I'm optimistic they'll be able to figure it out. I am. I'm optimistic they'll be able to figure it out with one of those guys. So Strange, Robinson, Schweitzer, maybe even Wilson. I feel like they'll be able to find the answer. And it might not be great play at left guard, but I think it will be passable. Kyle Kirk, $20 super chat. Thank you, Kyle. Biggest difference is Vrabel showing the vision. No GM should have final say. They don't coach and develop. Do we think Shanahan isn't setting expectations for Lynch? Eliot is smart, but he was left on an island last year. Kyle, I think it's a great point. And I know some people, there's this fine line. There's this fine line of coming across as excusing Eliot Wolf's offseason last year and trying to explain some of the pitfalls and how you could kind of walk into the offseason that they had last season. And one of the major things which Kyle is talking about here is having a coach that fully understands what type of player he wants, understands the kind of coaching staff he's going to have. Like all of these things that Gerard Mayo and Eliot Wolf had to work on last year in January, all of that stuff Mike Vrabel already had figured out. Like Vrabel walked in, and this was a big reason why I wanted Vrabel to be the hire. I talked about it a bunch, right? I talked about it before Gerard Mayo was hired. I wanted Vrabel to be the guy. Because when you walk into a building, you understand what you need, you understand what you want, but you also have your list. Like Vrabel came in with a list of names. He knew who he wanted on his coaching staff. And that goes back to the Rolodex stuff and the network that Vrabel had that Gerard Mayo just didn't have. So you're already starting from behind because you have a rookie head coach, and now Wolf is taking responsibilities from Mayo that he probably shouldn't be taking from Mayo, but he's taking those responsibilities because he has to. Mayo can't put together an entire staff, so who helps him? Wolf helps him put together the staff. Wolf has to sit there through all of these coaching interviews. He doesn't even go to some of these, pro days. I don't think Wolf went to the Senior Bowl last year. So he's missing out on all of these pivotal GM duties because he's back at Foxborough trying to help his rookie head coach with the very basics. I mean, Bedard said to me on the podcast we just recorded over the weekend, I think it was the last one we did, that Eliot Wolf was even helping Gerard Mayo with the practice schedule. Now, again, that's not to absolve every decision that Wolf made. It's not to excuse his offseason. He failed last offseason. It's just to add context. It's very difficult to be, doing your job as the GM. It's very difficult to be doing all of the different things you're supposed to be doing in preparation for a draft when you're also doing other things that the head coach is supposed to be doing. Now you're splitting the baby. And so when Mike Vrabel comes in, Eliot Wolf is, I'm sure he was elated because Eliot Wolf says to himself, well, now I don't have to worry about whether or not Mike Vrabel knows what he's doing when it comes to, practice schedule. I don't have to worry about Vrabel, not having any coaches on his staff. So All of those things impact the bigger picture. Again, it's not to write off last offseason, and I'll say it again, Wolf failed. But Wolf's job last year was exponentially more difficult than it was this year. Exponentially. Because Wolf was doing a hell of a lot more last year. He was doing things he should not have been doing. And I think that's a major reason why Robert Kraft stood by Wolf publicly and wanted to see what would happen with Wolf here along with Vrabel, because I'm sure people in the organization knew. Behind closed doors, they knew. You see what's going on. Like, you see what's happening unfold. And Daniel asks me, Kraft's fault. Absolutely. I've said this from the beginning. What happened last year was all on Kraft. He was the genesis. He was the nexus of it all. It was his terrible process. It was promoting Gerard Mayo via contract before Mayo was ready. And, Mayo wasn't ready for a lot of what was going on. And so, it was a very, very difficult situation for Wolf. Again, it doesn't write off what happened. It doesn't absolve him from responsibility. He swung and missed mostly in free agency. We'll see if the draft turns around a little bit this year versus, what we saw from those guys last year. But Wolf's job, he was more focused on what his job was this year. Right? Do your job. Focus on what you're responsible for. Last year, he's running around trying to, figure out what to do. And some would say that, and I know this has been said, it's been written, that Wolf was kind of, he was holding the hand of Mayo through a lot of different things last year, especially early on in the process. So every minute you've got to spend your energy on helping the head coach is a minute that you can't spending your energy on what your responsibilities are, being a GM. So I do think that hurt. Vrabel coming in and being fully ready, understanding the mission, understanding how to run a program, that made it easier for everybody in that building. And I think when you walk away from the draft, as far as the execution, not player by player, but the execution of the draft, being ahead on positional runs, moving up and down, manipulating the board in the right way, the consensus boards versus where you got guys, all those different things, it's clear that the execution, the process was much better this year. And you give Mike Vrabel a lot of credit for that because he understood what needed to be done when he took over. But you also give Eliot Wolf some credit because he was doing a lot of the legwork and put together that grading system and helped put this class together. Don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, don't forget to subscribe. Those three things help us tremendously. The goal is 7,000 subscribers by mandatory minicamp, which is June 9th. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate every single one of you that spends your time, your valuable time watching us and commenting and listening to us. It means the world to me. It truly does. I'll be back tomorrow, Locked On Patriots, with a new episode. We'll be live here 3 o'clock on Friday as well, right here on YouTube. But until then, be well, and we'll talk to you soon.